Hello?
Hello, and welcome to the IntensiveCareHotline.com podcast. IntensiveCareHotline.com helps families of critically ill patients in intensive care to instantly improve their lives so that they can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, more control, more power, and more influence, so that families can stay in control of their critically ill loved one's destiny. I'm your host, Patrick Hutzel, founder and editor of IntensiveCareHotline.com. And as part of our interview and podcast series, I have a very special guest with me tonight. I've got here with me Manuela from New York. Manuela, how are you?
Good, thanks, Patrick. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Manuela, I really want to thank you, first of all, to come on to this interview. You've contacted us last month with a very difficult situation where you had your daughter in intensive care. She was on a ventilator. She was intubated. And when you first contacted us, you encountered a really difficult situation. Can you share more about, the situation that you found yourself and your daughter in last month?
Yes, I can. My daughter first went to one hospital where she had a UTI and pneumonia. It was treated with antibiotics, which was fine. She was released after 9 days. But 2 days later, she had 106 rectal fever.
Right.
And I took her to a different hospital where I went through ER. I called EMS and I went to the ER. And I was immediately asked, uncomfortably so, about whether I had guardianship over my daughter.
Right.
Which was not a problem for me to give, but I had never been asked before. A copy of my guardianship papers. And anyway, they took an X-ray in ER. They told me her lungs were clear. And they took a nose swab for the flu, and that tested positive, so they said. And they put her not in the ICU, in a step-down unit. And weirdly enough, they put her on antibiotics for the flu. And after all these hours, overnight, 15, 16 hours there, I told my husband to watch for my daughter. I went home briefly, and I got a phone call from home no sooner than I left, and a doctor told me that he had intubated my daughter and she was on life support. I was completely shocked. Shocked. So I went to the hospital, and now she was in the ICU, intubated, and she was on 50 mix of units of propofol. That was she was put in an induced coma. And I talked to a neurologist who wanted to up on one of her medications, and I told him that I wanted to ask our own doctor before I even agreed to it, because I said to him an epileptic drug would not really make a difference in treating the flu.
Why?
Epileptic drugs.
Right. Do you know why? Why did they intubate your daughter at the time? What was the reason they were giving you?
The reason was said on the phone by this doctor. He said, I have a young lady here who's not responsive, and I intubated her. But my daughter, at this point in time, cannot speak.
Right.
So does that mean to him not responsive? I mean, that's the only reason he gave me.
And your daughter at that stage was non-verbal anyway.
She was non-verbal, She was non-verbal. And she had the flu, and she was sleeping just like I left her sleeping. I mean, you have the flu, that's all you really want to do, sleep. Absolutely.
And there must be more significant, there must be genuine clinical reasons before you intubate someone. And it sounds to me like you haven't been given those reasons.
That's correct. I've never been given those reasons.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And how did that make you feel when you shared that, when you first went to ER, that they were asking you for guardianship papers? I mean, how did that make you feel at the time?
It raised the red flag. It absolutely raised the red flag. I mean, that night I went to the ER, but the next day I called a patient advocate. She said it raised the red flag for her. I called my lawyer. She said it raised the red flag for her.
Yeah.
We were uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I guess as your journey went on in there, those red flags were sort of confirmed, but I'm sure you can share that, what happened, from this point forward. Then after they intubated your daughter, what happened from there?
Well, I talked to neurology. He wanted to raise one of her medications, and I said to them, I'm going to talk to my own neurologist to see. And he said to do it, to raise it minimally, not too much. And I said, okay. I went back the next day, and that hospital told me verbatim, today is another day. We will raise it more than twice, this medication, and give her a booster.
Right.
And I told them, no, absolutely not.
Right. And what was their response to that?
Well, their response to that was, let's call neurology. You need to talk to the neurologist. Who never called back, I guess. Never called back the hospital to talk to me. The problem with that hospital was that my husband slept there to, watch over my daughter. That between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m., he had to leave when the hospital did rounds. That is the weirdest thing I've ever heard, because doctors usually want to talk to the family when they do rounds.
Well, yes, you'd hope
each
so.
and every time go ahead.
No, you hope that the hospital would want to talk to a family during the ward rounds. What was that what really happened?
Right.
Was that what really happened in your situation?
Yes, it really happened.
Right.
He had to leave. He had to leave, and each time he left, I was informed that they allegedly did a test. They allegedly did an EEG. Not possible. Her hair was not full of glue. Her hair was freshly washed like I had washed it a couple of days before.
Mm-hmm.
They did a midline. They did apparently a lot of x-rays, which I've come to find out now. They did an MRI on her. They did an ultrasound on her leg. They did the CAT scan. That's a lot of radiation.
Yeah.
And we were only in that hospital a few days.
Right. And what was your concern with increasing the anti-epileptic drugs? And we probably should share with our listeners that your daughter has a history of regular seizures. But what was your concern with your daughter being on a ventilator and then getting more anti-seizure drugs while she was already on propofol and probably some fentanyl? What was your concern there?
My concern was that, in my opinion, she had the flu. Why they intubated her is beyond me. And for the flu, you don't need to raise the anti-epileptic drugs.
Yeah.
Not in my opinion.
Did she have?
She didn't have any seizures.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, as most people would know, like if you are in an induced coma, it's difficult enough to get out of an induced coma, and if you have more sedating anti-seizure drugs, it's even more difficult to come out of an induced coma, which was a concern you identified early on, or throughout this journey. And what did you do next?
Well, since I refused, the hospital said you need to change hospitals, and I told them a hospital of my choice, and they told me that I had to find an accepting doctor, which was unheard of. They should really find an accepting doctor in the hospital of my choice. They were not willing to do that.
Yeah.
And I went to the hospital of my choice, and it was not possible for me to find an accepting doctor. So then this hospital said, go to another hospital, which was also, I have to say, I'm going to say it, Catholic health system, right? I'm going to have to say this.
Well,
the same company, so to speak. And they said to go to the other hospital for a few days to do an EEG and come back to them. And I suggested a hospital of my choice, and critical care management told me that would be too risky to take her into the EMS to drive her to the hospital of my choice. And I countered that by saying, you're going to do 2 trips, one to the one hospital and then back to you. If one trip is risky, then 2 trips are double risky, and they disagreed, naturally.
Right.
But we transferred out to the other hospital.
To the hospital of your choice. To the hospital of your choice.
No, of their choice.
Of their choice. Okay.
This was the hospital of their choice, not my choice.
Right. Okay. And what happened from there?
And they promised me that the tube, she would be extubated. And they gave me one reason after another. They were very nasty. They talked down to me, the PAs, told me I knew nothing. They gave her more medication, which I was against. And they didn't extubate her. And the problem is time is running out. Within 14 days, to my understanding, you will get a cup in your throat.
That's right. You will often get a tracheostomy, and by that stage, you had already contacted me, and I've given you enough insights in terms of why we needed to avoid the tracheostomy and why we needed to get her extubated as quickly as possible. But then from what I remember, there was another big red flag showing up from your end, that if your daughter was to end up with a tracheostomy, they had the next steps lined up already, which would...
They had the next steps lined up. The first hospital had an old age home. My daughter is only 20, to put her in. And the second hospital of their choice had a home for children, I think some adults as well, that they wanted to put her in. And that was not going to be a choice. That's no choice.
Yeah. What a nightmare situation. I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. What a nightmare situation to have that outlook, to potentially have your daughter ending up in a nursing home, in an old age nursing home, or even with young people. What a nightmare situation.
That's correct. And then I contacted you. I was lucky to get a hold of you. We talked. You gave me a lot of insights. And funny, the night before I contacted you, and the very next day I go to that second hospital, and I meet a new neurologist. It's the next week. Staff changes, so you get a new crew.
Yeah.
And he not only gave my daughter a paralytic, which paralyzes you, to see whether she had seizures on the EEG, when his colleague said she had no seizures. He then wanted to give her, without telling me, intravenous meds, which are generic anti-epileptic drugs, which my daughter gets seizures from. She takes only brand name drugs, and I bring my brand name bottles to the hospital for them to use it.
Yeah.
And when I refused their generic drugs, that hospital told me they will, as of that same night, take away my guardianship. And I called you, Patrick.
Yeah. And
you told me what to do.
Yeah. What a nightmare situation. And your red flags initially were confirmed there when they first asked you about the guardianship, and then they bring up the guardianship issue again. What a nightmare situation for any parent to even have to, sort of think about that they could potentially take the guardianship away for your daughter.
That's correct. And then they could go and do anything they want to her. And that's my concern. They can do the tracheostomy, they can, I don't know, operate on a brain, they can do anything because they always said we need to know where the seizures are coming from. Well, you know what? Not so much. Not with my daughter. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That night, you told me what to do about this guardianship thing. And I went to the nurse manager. I told her, number one, I want them up the records exactly as you said.
Yeah.
By the next day at 10 a.m., I gave her a time exactly as you said.
Yeah.
And I want the agenda. We were supposed to have a meeting the next day with this hospital, the second hospital. That was the whole thing. And you said, get the agenda in written form. And I told her that. And she said, we don't do it. I said, you're going to do this for me, and that's it. You're going to do this, and you're going to give me a copy.
Yeah.
And I said, you said you will be there. And she said, no, but our law team will be there. Well, that's all I needed to hear, because the truth is, she has to disclose to me, she has to, there's no ifs and buts, she has to tell me that their law team is coming. I said, you have to tell me this, because this way I can bring my lawyer. And tomorrow the meeting is off. And that's when they called the neurologist that gave her the paralytic. He got on the phone. He gave me a long story why generic drugs allegedly are the same as brand name. He called me uneducated, and that's okay. And then I repeated everything out loud, what he said. I said, let me repeat what I heard you say. Let me just repeat what I heard you say. And he knew I called from the nurse's front desk. He knew. He knew the whole ICU heard him. Everybody working there heard me, not him, heard me, say it. Heard me repeat what he said.
Yeah.
And then he finally said, which hospital do you want to go to?
Yeah.
I will make arrangements.
Yeah.
I was never so happy to hear that.
Yes.
He took me, he made within 3 minutes, got an accepting doctor, and we finally went to a hospital of my choice.
Yeah. By then they knew that you wouldn't take no for an answer, and by then they knew you were asking all the right questions. But what's just for our listeners, really, what's important there to know, your daughter was in an induced coma, which is challenging enough, and then they were giving her paralytic drugs, which delays people of coming out of the induced coma, and they usually need even more sedatives when they're getting paralyzed, So you could see the writing was on the wall. They were heading potentially towards a tracheostomy, and then potentially put your daughter into, a nursing home, into a home. Yeah. So thankfully you recognized all of those red flags, and then you were proactive. I mean, another thing that worked in your favor. You took action. A lot of people that come to us, they're too afraid to take action. They're too intimidated by the doctors, by the nurses, by the system, and you can't be intimidated. You got to do what's right for your family member, which is what you've done.
There is always something you feel. You feel this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing. If you feel something is wrong, everybody has that feeling. It has to be. You're sitting in a hospital and you say, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. Try to get out. And don't ever be afraid. These doctors, they think they are godlike. There is only one God. It's not them.
Yeah.
Trust me. It's not the doctors. It's not the nurses. It's not the PAs. They like to talk down to you. Counter them. They insult you. It's okay. Laugh at them. If they insult you, it's okay. That's not what's important. The important thing is to get my child out of this evil hospital and get her into a hospital. My choice.
Yeah, yeah,
and with your help, Patrick, we did that.
Yes, no, absolutely. So what then happened? What then happened in the other hospital? What happened from there?
So the hospital of my choice took Alessandra in, my daughter in, and I met with the team. I met with the team for rounds. They rounded at 10 p.m., which was fine for me. And they told me, they took a long time to get her ready for me to see her in ICU. She was still intubated. Mm-hmm. And they told me that her heart had stood still for a few seconds. We had a cardiology on board. They had a sonogram of her heart. Cardiology said her heart is okay. Mm-hmm. The problem was that the drugs given at the other hospital made her heart stand still. They actually could have killed my daughter. That's a problem for me. I've had a great team of doctors. They waited a few more days, but on their last day, because they change doctors every week, like every hospital changes staff every week, they extubated her.
Right.
With no problem. She had a high heart rate. Her heart rate went down to normal.
Yeah.
Everybody was surprised. Everybody but me, because she didn't need to be intubated anyway. They did it for the money.
What a terrible thought.
It's easy. 10 grand a day intubation and ICU room here in the States. It's
right.
easy $10,000 a day. That's a terrible thing to do to a person.
Absolutely. Not only a terrible thing to do, I mean, the side effects are huge. It's not only the side effects, it's also, especially in your first hospital, the long-term outlook was basically your daughter ending up in a nursing home with a trach. What a nightmare. And I should say your 20-year-old daughter, but
20 years old.
What a nightmare. So then basically, rather than your daughter having a tracheostomy within, how many days did you say again? Within 4 days, she then was extubated. Is that right? 4 days?
12 hours. She was 12 days.
12 days.
Intubated for 12 days.
Yes, but how many more days? When she changed hospitals, as far as I remember, would have been 3 or 4 days before she then got extubated.
She changed. It would have been another week at the time.
Week, okay.
They kept her intubated. They told me they tried to extubate her, but there was a little swelling in the throat. So they needed to give steroids to get the swelling in the throat down.
Yes. Yep.
And they did that. Before, you can't extubate with a swelling in the throat.
No.
That's no good.
No. It would have been too risky. Yes. Would have been too risky. Yes. It could have been detrimental to everything that was happening. So it could have made things worse. But so then your daughter got extubated, got out of ICU, and now she's back home?
Now we're back home. We're home for about a week and a half, yes.
That's really good. And so far, your daughter is doing well?
So far, she's doing well.
That's great. I mean, what a change, in situation really that could have gone down a completely different path.
This situation could have gone so wrong.
Yeah.
And thank the Lord it didn't. It did help again.
Thank you.
Recall. I mean, nobody here in New York was able to help me. Not a lawyer. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knows what to do.
Yeah.
I don't lose faith, but do not be afraid of these doctors. Do not, or the nurses, or just stand up. But once you stand up, they will back down.
Yes.
My understanding.
Yes, and also, I hate to say it, but sometimes it is enough to just threaten them and say, look, if I want this and I want that, and if I'm not getting this, then I'll bring in a lawyer. That's often enough to get them to change. The other thing that was important in this situation, from my perspective, was you weren't afraid to implement. I am sometimes dealing with clients who are afraid to implement. You also realized in this situation you've got almost nothing to lose. You could just see the outlook was just so bleak. You could just see that the outlook was just so bleak that you knew you had to do something. And, what happens in 99% of the cases is the hospitals or the ICUs are asking for family meetings. And I say to my clients, don't go, get the agenda. You have every right to be informed about what's happening. And sometimes they're too timid to just ask. It's just asking a question. They can't force you to come to a meeting. What's the point? So
what we have discussed even, that they're going to implement their drugs or take my daughter away from me, this is not an option.
Exactly.
Neither one is an option.
Exactly. So, you weren't afraid to implement. But let me ask you this. What do you think the difference was in hospitals? Do you think obviously we know there has been a huge difference in approaches. Did you sense any ulterior motives from the first hospital?
No, it was a completely different ballgame with this hospital. They talked to me in a normal way. They said, "You're a mother. You know how she is. Let us know how she is. Bring in her AFO to this. Do with her as you do at home. Feed her food, not that Jevity. I don't know what you have over in Australia, but we have something called Jevity here that the patients get through the feeding tube. And it's
very similar here. Very similar.
So they worked with me, this hospital, and I had a set of doctors that were great human beings.
Right.
And they knew it was wrong. They knew it was wrong with the other hospitals. That they will not say it, but they knew it was wrong because they extubated her.
Yeah. But the other question I had was the first hospital where you were, I believe in the Catholic system. Did you sense any ulterior motives there? Did you feel like they had a different agenda from the start?
They had an agenda from the start. They saw my daughter. They saw she couldn't speak. I feel they waited for me to leave because I said I have guardianship. They waited for me to leave. No sooner I left, I was home a little bit, but I get a phone call. She's intubated. How's that possible?
Yeah.
I talked to an ICU doctor with me there, and I said to her she cannot speak at this moment in time. I explained it to them. And then a social worker from the first hospital had called me and said I can recommend a great nursing home for her. This was weird. I have never been talked to like that in any of the other hospitals.
Right. So you could almost see, and I remember us talking about this at the time, you could almost see that they had a pathway lined up that would keep your daughter confined to institutions.
That's correct. And not only that, intubation can actually give you pneumonia, which ended up the case. It ended up that she had pneumonia, and now she was given more antibiotics for different types, which bring down her seizure threshold. It's a vicious cycle. It's a problem.
Yeah. So
they made her sicker than she needed to be for the money. That's really what it was.
Right. And you could see that, they almost had the pathway lined up for your daughter to keep her hostage in hospital, and then going on to potentially to a nursing home. So, your instincts were probably right from the start, when they first asked you about evidence for guardianship, and then they wanted to take away guardianship, and by the same time, they were basically lining up the pathway for your daughter. I mean, your red flags thankfully went off, and we took a different...
They would have destroyed my daughter. They would have destroyed her. They would have killed her. They would have collected a lot of money from the insurance. They would have collected just a lot of money. It's all about money. That's what it's about.
What a scary situation.
It's scary. It's scary to get sick and be in the hands of people like that.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see that, you were able to turn this situation around. People who are going into intensive care in any hospital, people can't be vigilant enough. They really need to be able to read what's happening. They need to be able to look ahead and see, what's the most likely outcome. Are they doing all the right things? Again, you were able to read the play, if you will.
Nowadays, somebody said something to me in the hospital, and it was so true. Somebody said to me, nowadays, back in the day when we didn't have cell phones or anything, people looked at doctors like really they were God, and they believed everything they said. Nowadays, we all have a cell phone. We can all Google, if in doubt, Google, read.
Yep.
You do nothing, you sit in the hospital anyway. Google and read. Google every medication. Google the side effects. Google how medications work with each other. Google. Then you got something to talk about. You will find out a lot that you will not like. Yeah. That's what I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't just say the medication is good. The doctor said so. No. The medication actually made her heart stop. For a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is really scary stuff. But thankfully, you know, within a couple of weeks, your daughter was back home again. And it sounds like she's, you know, back to what she was like before. And hopefully you can keep
her. And then now we have to move forward to get her back to normal.
So she's not quite back to normal yet?
Well, she's not back to her former baseline, let's put it that way. But when I get her to her former baseline, we're always working her to get her back to talking and walking.
Yep. Like
she was, you know, 4 years ago.
Right. Yeah, and that would have been impossible if she had been stuck in a, you know.
That would never happen.
Would have never happened.
No.
Yeah, no, that's, look, Manuela, I really appreciate you sharing your and your daughter's story, because I think it shares a valuable lesson for our listeners, you know, where they can learn from what to do if they feel like they're cornered in a situation like that. And there is always hope, or there's always a way to change an unfortunate situation with taking the right steps, with getting informed, and also with not taking no for an answer, because I know at the time when you first contacted me, I realized you're very determined here, and that's often half of the battle. You know, you wouldn't have let anything done to your daughter that wasn't in her best interest, and that's often half of the battle, to really stand up to, you know, what you know is right.
That's correct. People say you don't know anything, you know, the doctor. I know enough about her medication or medication that they give in the hospital that it's not okay what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's also a sign that if you do want to change hospitals, there is a way, you know, because again, we get a number of inquiries here where people want to change hospitals and they ask what should they do. Yes, there always needs to be an admitting doctor somewhere else, but you know, it is definitely possible with, you know, making a couple of phone calls, with talking to doctors or talking to the hospitals. It is possible. So if you are finding yourself in a similar situation, you know, don't give up. Contact us or talk to the doctors to begin with. You know, find a way like you have, and, you know, the doors will open. So again, Manuela, I really want to thank you for taking the time to come onto this call and share your story there. That will really help our listeners. So go and have a look at our website, intensivecarehotline.com, where you find a lot of free resources. If you have a loved one in intensive care, you can also get one-on-one consulting and advocacy. And we also have an online membership where you can join a like-minded community. And thanks again, Manuela, for coming to this call, and I'll talk to you soon.
I'll talk to you soon, Patrick. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.